to the presentation, but I wanted to welcome you guys and thank you for joining. I'm Rocio Luna. I'm the presenter, and I have the amazing Noelle McCall on the call to be presenting subcontractor requirements along with other um, contract requirements. She is an expert in this field, and she has worked in the past for the top insurance companies in the world. So I'm going to let her do her intro as she is the expert.
Awesome. Thanks, Rocio, and thanks for putting this on today. I appreciate it. So hello, everybody. My name is Noelle McCall. I'm the Director for Contract Risk Management for People's First in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm also the former national practice leader for contract review at Marsh and Aon, the world's two largest insurance brokers. I also have the advantage of having gone to college and getting a bachelor's degree in business with a major in contracts and acquisitions and a minor in international business. So I'm one of those lucky people who gets to use what they learned in college every day. I'm also a total contracts and insurance policy nerd. So my idea of a good time is digging into the insurance requirements of a contract and looking at policy language. Probably not everybody's favorite, but that's fun to me. So over the years, I've reviewed thousands of contracts for all different types of clients, of course, heavy on the construction industry for obvious reasons. And I've developed a number of client customized tools, training presentations, and insurance requirement templates for use in contracts. And all of that is to help simplify and streamline what can be a very manual contract review process. Hopefully AI will help us out with that in the near future. And I also help clients to reduce their contractual risk. So you can find more information about me at my website at contractriskacademy.com. So thanks, Rocio, for the intro. Shall we go ahead and get started with some questions we received from subcontractors?
Yes, and then Michael and Mike, you guys are on the call. So if you guys, just want to let you guys know, if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop your question on the chat. More than welcome to answer and join.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so let's take a couple questions that we received from people that registered. The first one is all about completed operations insurance. So the question was, what is completed operations insurance and how exactly does that work? And we know a lot of you on the phone today, you may not be insurance experts, so I will do my best to try to explain things in a simple, easy to understand way and try to avoid the use of those lovely acronyms that a lot of insurance professionals like to use. So what is completed operations insurance? So this is coverage it's a standard coverage that you can get and should get under a general liability insurance policy. And this completed operations refers to the work that the insured has done that's been completed as called for in a contract or work completed at a single job site under a contract involving maybe multiple job sites, or work that's been put to its intended use. So that's what it means. And the coverage that's provided, it's provided for damages, meaning lawsuits, resulting from bodily injury or property damage to third parties with respect to the insured's completed operations. So how does this coverage get triggered? The coverage gets triggered if the bodily injury or property damage is caused by an occurrence as defined in the general liability policy that takes place in the policy territory, and only if the bodily injury or the property damage occurs during the policy period. So the coverage territory for U.S. general liability policies typically includes at least U.S., Canada, the U.S. territories, that sort of thing. It does not include someplace like Mexico over in Europe. You'd need to refer to your policy to see the coverage territory, how that works. So typical limits for general liability coverage for completed operations are $1 million per occurrence and $2 million under what they call the products/completed operations aggregate limit. Now, an aggregate limit is the total limit for any and all claims that may come in during the policy term. That's the maximum the policy will pay out. So typical limits are 1 million per occurrence, 2 million for the aggregate. Some policies might do 2 million per occurrence and 4 million aggregate or more. You can also purchase additional liability limits under what's called an umbrella or an excess liability policy. And most subcontractors do have at least 1 million of that coverage. Now, there's many reasons why subcontractors should have completed operations coverage. So one is it provides coverage for you after your work has been completed. So you need that coverage after your work's been done because a lot of the premium that's charged for general liability policies is charged for the completed operations coverage because that's where a lot of your claims are going to come in after the work's done. The coverage also helps protect company assets. So you can use the insurance to pay the claims instead of paying for it out of your pocket. The coverage helps prevent bankruptcy or business failure in the event of costly damage. And it's usually required in your contracts with upstream parties such as GCs or owners. The coverage also helps you provide evidence of financial strength that may assist you in closing your bids and your deals. Having the coverage helps you avoid breach of contract, because as I mentioned a minute ago, most contracts out there for construction are going to require completed operations coverage. It can also help you satisfy bank loan requirements, and it generally protects the public by covering property damage and bodily injury to third parties. I do want to note that completed operations claims are some of the most common general liability claims out there. If your policy does not have this coverage, you have a big fat hole in your coverage and you need to get it filled. So talk to your insurance agent or broker if you need to get the coverage added to your policy. If you're not sure if you have the coverage, you can have your insurance agent or broker look at it, or you can book a call with me and I'll be happy to give you a complimentary call to take a look at it for you. Now, here's an example of how the coverage applies, because a lot of people like to say, well, how does this really work? So let's assume that a sole proprietor has his general liability policy, and this would be an occurrence-based policy.
Noelle, sorry to interrupt you. Mike has a question. Can you please review what is excluded under completed operations?
Yeah, great question. So you need to look at the policy exclusions on the policy to see what exclusions come in there, but it does not cover ongoing operations. So the work you're doing now that you're in the middle of that's not been done yet, that's covered under ongoing operations. So that's covered under the general aggregate limit, the each occurrence, and then the general aggregate limit on your policy. So great question. And you definitely want to look at the exclusions on your policy because they're going to take away coverage that you might need. So something good to look at. So for this example, we've got a sole proprietor contractor, and he's got his general liability policies had it with the same insurer since 2003. And the sole proprietor is a builder, and he constructs single-family homes. He does all of the carpentry work himself. So roll forward 20 years, 2023, he's met his financial goals, he gets ready to retire, and so he cancels his general liability policy in December 2023. What happens is a home that he built the year before he retired in 2022 has a problem. He used the wrong material to secure the floor, and the floor eventually weakened and collapsed in early 2024, which severely injured the occupant at the time of collapse. So there's bodily injury that's going on here. The injured party, of course, sues the sole proprietor / builder for her injuries. So does the builder have any CGL coverage? Do they have any general liability coverage? The answer is no. Some people would say yes, but it's no because he doesn't have a policy in place at the time when that occurrence happens. It's not when he originally built the structure or did the work. He's got to have a policy in force when the occurrence happens and that bodily injury or property damage happens. So a common response to it, does he have coverage, would be that they would think the insurance carrier that wrote the coverage back in 2022, the time the floor was installed incorrectly, they think that should defend the sole proprietor, the contractor, and pay the damages because of bodily injury if he's legally liable. Unfortunately for the builder, the policy does not obligate the insurer to respond in any way because the bodily injury did not occur during the policy period. And a lot of people, including some insurance professionals, don't know this. So I want to bring up that point. Now, the policy that provides coverage for completed operations claims is the policy that's in force when the bodily injury or property damage loss occurs or the claim is made, not the policy that was in force when you originally did the work. So if you're thinking of canceling your policy at some point, maybe you get ready to retire, make sure, or you stop doing business for whatever reason, it's critical that you continue to maintain general liability coverage with completed operations coverage, or you can purchase a discontinued completed operations policy. Because if you don't have one of these, you won't have any coverage for completed operations claims. And states may have what they call statute of repose for up to 10 years or more. So you want to check the laws in the states where you do business in, because the statute of repose sets the cap on how many years later that a claim can come in and you can be hit with it. Now, some people think that a tail policy, if you've ever heard of that, will cover completed operations claims for losses that occur during the tail period, but that's not correct. Tail coverage isn't even applicable to occurrence-based general liability policies. It applies to claims-made policies. It's a different type of general liability policy that the claim has to be made during the policy period for coverage to apply. But even if the builder had a claims-made policy like that and bought the tail coverage, the policy does not respond to bodily injuries that take place after the policy expired and during the tail, because the tail provides coverage only for injuries and damages that occurred prior to the purchasing of the tail, for which the claim is made against the insured during the tail period. So that was a great question that we got in. That was the first one that we've got. I'll pause a minute and see if anyone else has any other questions. And if not, I will go on to question number 2. I don't see any questions. Okay. The next one we got in was a really good question. So if my subcontractor's insurance denies a claim, do I have to pay for it as a contractor? Even though my contract says the subcontractor is 100% responsible. So the answer to this one is yes, even if your contract states that the subcontractor is 100% responsible, you could still be required to pay for a claim denied by their insurance, depending on the specific circumstances, what your contract with your upstream parties requires, and the local laws. So if you're sued by a third party because of one of your subcontractor's negligence, you could be held liable if the subcontractor's insurance does not cover the claim, meaning you may need to pay out of pocket or hopefully use your insurance to defend yourself and cover damages. So how this situation plays out depends on a number of factors. Be sure to check with your lawyer for legal advice. And also check with your insurance agent or broker or insurance consultant for insurance advice. Here are some things to consider in this situation. What was the claim for? Do you know what it was for? Why was the claim denied by the subcontractor's insurer? Was it for something that could be insured? Or is that type of loss typically excluded under general liability insurance or the other insurance policies. So for that, I would say find out why the claim was denied, determine if the claim may be covered by your insurance, even if it's not covered by your sub's insurance. Another thing to keep in mind is, where did the loss take place? Now, coverage, as I mentioned earlier, applies within a coverage territory of the policy. And most U.S. general liability policies would not cover work done in, let's say, Mexico or Europe or Australia. So check the coverage territory in the policy. Also, in your contract with the subcontractor, did you require them to provide you with certificates of insurance and copies of their insurance policies? You should, that's a best practice, but check and see if you did. Consider requesting copies of the sub's insurance policies and ask an insurance professional to review their policies to see if and how coverage may apply and what's excluded. You really can't tell that from just looking at a certificate of insurance. Another question asked, was the claim for defective work arising out of your completed operations, things that you've done in the past, or work that they've done for you in the past? If so, you may have coverage for the claim under your general liability policy if your general liability policy includes the standard ISO coverage form. That form number is CG0001. It's on a lot of the general liability policies out there. So it's, there's a pretty good chance that it is included on your policy. So you may have coverage under that because in that coverage form, there's an exception to the your work exclusion as defined in your policy. And what this does is this exception provides coverage for liability arising out of your work, as defined in the policy, performed by your subcontractors, and assuming there are no endorsements that remove or change that coverage. So chances are you probably have some coverage there. Now, in the policy, whenever you see a term that's in quotation marks, like your work, it means you need to look at the definition section to see what's covered there, how it applies. So your work in the standard general liability policy is defined as work or operations performed by you or on your behalf, plus materials, parts, or equipment that are furnished in connection with such work or operations. Now, coverage may be provided for damages resulting from the property damage arising out of your work performed by that sub. Note there's no coverage for that particular part of any property that has to be restored, repaired, or replaced because your work was incorrectly performed on it. So for defective work that's done by your sub, the cost to tear out the work and redo it, that cost itself is not covered. But the resulting property damage that results from the defective work can be covered. So here's a good example for you. Let's say your sub is a plumber and you hire them to do some plumbing work. After the work is done and the job's complete, a pipe that the sub had installed perhaps under the floor, it leaks and it causes damage to some homeowners' hardwood floors. So in that case, under the coverage under the standard general liability policy, the leaky pipe itself that might cost you $5, that pipe itself is not covered, but the cost to restore and repair or replace the homeowner's floors could be covered. So that was the second question we got in. I will pause again and see if there are any questions. Let's see. Looks like we have one. What about when the sub doesn't carry the same limits or coverage, or the sub has exclusions, leaving the GC exposed and having to pay the claim? Great question. So if there's no coverage under the sub's insurance, the next thing I would do is see if you as the GC or the contractor, if you have coverage under your policy to cover it. That's the next place I would look. If there's no insurance that can apply to the claim, then you're probably going to end up paying out of pocket. So yet another reason why insurance is very important to contractors, because you don't want to have to use your pocket to pay things if you can use insurance to cover things. Great question. Any other questions? If not, I will go on to the next one. Okay. There's a couple other things actually in the second scenario, a couple other questions to keep in mind too. Are you an additional insured on the subcontractor's general liability policy? Because if so, even if there's no coverage for the subcontractor, you might have coverage for the claim as an additional insured on the subcontractor's general liability policy. So consider filing a claim under additional insured coverage. And also, did you require your subcontractor to provide contractual liability coverage under general liability to support their indemnity obligations to you? If that's in your contract, then you may have coverage under contractual liability on their general liability policy, even if they don't have coverage. So check that as well. And then lastly, does your contract require the sub to require them to indemnify you? If so, you may require the sub to indemnify you to pay the claim out of their pocket if their insurance does not cover the claim. So there are several ways you can deal with that uninsured claim situation, and I hope that's helpful to you. All right, any other questions? Okay, I've got another one I've got here. How can I help ensure that my subcontractors have the insurance they should have for construction contracts? Well, that's a great question. There are two parts to the answer to that. So what you want to do is part one, in your contracts with the subs, and you should have a contract with them, you want to tailor the insurance requirements in there for them to comply with based on that subcontractor's scope of work and the risk exposures associated with what you're hiring to do for you. That's part one. If anyone needs help with drafting or updating insurance requirement template language, I can work with your lawyers to help you get that updated. So just let me know, send me a DM if you need some help with that. Part two, after you get the insurance requirements in the contract, they agree to that, the contract's signed. Now you need to verify their insurance. You need to verify they have what you've required them to have. So you do this by requiring and reviewing their certificates of insurance, but don't stop there. You also want to require copies of their policies and endorsements that are required by the contract. It doesn't help to require the insurance on the front end and then fail to verify that your subs have the insurance on the back end. You need to do both. And to save you time and effort, you can consider using a third-party certificate of insurance management service, such as Evident ID. It's one I would highly recommend. They can request the certificates from your subs, review the certificates, verify the insurance they're providing, all of that. They can even go one step further than any certificate tracking management service I know of out there, in that they can review the policy pages and endorsements against contract requirements that you've set up for those subs. Nobody else does that I know of. So if you want a free demo with Evident ID, let me know. You can book a call with me or send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help with that. Any other questions? All right. What is the anemia of the firm? Oh, what is the name of the firm? Oh, yeah, Evident ID. EVIDENT ID. Great question. All right. Question number 4. What are some reasons why I should not just rely on certificates of insurance to verify insurance for my subcontractors? This is a great question. There are a lot of reasons. First of all, certificates of insurance are not legal documents. They're not part of the policy. They can't be used to guarantee if and how coverage can apply. Also, certificates of insurance, if you look on those, the Accord forms, they have a bunch of disclaimers pointing you to the policies to verify coverage. So you need to review policy pages and endorsements to see if and how coverage may apply. You're not going to be able to tell that by just looking at the certificate. Also, sometimes subcontractors provide fake certificates of insurance. I've had this happen with some of my clients. In an effort to try to counter this, in your contracts with your subs, you should be requiring them to require their insurance agent or broker to send you certificates of insurance and just get them direct from the broker. There's less chance of having them doctored up if you do that. And then sometimes subs purchase insurance to get a job just because they need the job. You know, they want to get the job and then they cancel the insurance. So to counter this, in your contract, require the subs to have their insurance agent or brokers send you an updated certificate of insurance before they start. And then before they start the work and the effective date of the contract. And then anytime upon your request, if you want to verify that they still have insurance, and then at policy expiration, non-renewal, and replacement of any of the required coverages. Those 3 times, that's the best practice to help kind of get some more assurance that they still have the insurance that you've required them to have. And I'll pause there and see if there are any questions. Okay. All right, so here's the next question. I struggle with knowing what to do with insurance requirements in my contracts with GCs and owners because I'm not an insurance expert and I don't know what coverage I have. I don't have a lot of time to review contracts. I'm just a small subcontractor. My insurance broker doesn't offer me any help with contract review. Sometimes I just sign contracts without even reviewing the insurance requirements because I feel like if I redline anything, then I might lose the bid. And even if I did propose changes, I don't know what to propose. I worry that I may not have the insurance I need, that I'll be on the hook for uninsured claims and maybe in breach of contract, all of which can hurt me financially and could cause me to go out of business. Here's a question. How can I know if I have the insurance I need for construction contracts? How do I know what to push back on that's over the top and unreasonable? Great timely question because this leads into our next half of the call today. And this is all about my new tool I created called the Ultimate Subcontractor Insurance Requirement Checklist. So what I would say to this person is you can get my new checklist, which when updated based on your policies, I can update it for you. It will show you what coverage you have versus what you may need for construction projects in the US. And some of the benefits, we'll take a look at the checklist itself in just a minute, but here's some of the benefits. It helps protect your profits. It helps because you can use insurance to pay for claims instead of out of pocket. It helps you avoid breach of contract because now you know you have the coverage you need for the contracts. It helps you know what coverage you have. And it also saves you time when reviewing the insurance requirements because everything is all laid out nice and pretty for you and it's easy to see what you have. It helps you identify and address insurance coverage gaps. So you might have some exclusions or limitations on your policy that take away the coverage that you need. And the checklist can help identify that. So you can get those gaps filled, request endorsements or whatever to get you the coverage you need. The checklist also helps you reduce the risk of unexpected and uninsured claims. Claims that come out of the blue that you thought might be insured, but they're not. It helps you know what coverage you may need for construction contracts. And it also, as a bonus, gives you strategies and tips that you can use today to reduce your contractual risk. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and give y'all the first look at the contractor insurance, ultimate subcontractor insurance requirement checklist. So let's take a look. All right, so here is what it looks like. Now it's in an Excel base just because it was easy to set it up this way. And with it being a checklist, it made sense. What I've done is this gives you guidance on the four most common insurance policies that you're going to need for any construction contract: general liability, auto, workers' comp, and employer's liability, umbrella or excess liability. So those are the four main ones. And then it also has a tab for insurance strategies that you can use today, so you know what to push back on that's really egregious or not fair to you as a subcontractor, and what might be okay to accept, because you may not know that. A lot of you are not insurance experts. So when it comes to the checklist, I make it nice and simple. I include one tab, one policy per tab, and they're all laid out the same way. So that's divided into three sections. So at the top here, we've got just an overview of what's covered in the policy in the way of limits, your policy expiration dates, who your insurance carrier is, their AM Best rating, because that's often required in your contract. So having it right there is very handy. If you have a deductible or a self-insured retention, you've got that information. If defense is inside or outside the policy limits, that's a big one. Because if defense under your policy is paid out under policy limits, it's going to eat away those limits, and then you won't have the limits available to pay for damages from lawsuits. So having defense, really, it makes defense unlimited when you have the defense outside policy limits. And under a standard general liability policy, defense will be outside the limits unless they add an endorsement or something to change that. Now, that's assuming they're using the ISO GL coverage form, the CG0001, but most of the policies do use that today. All right, let's scroll down. The second part of the policy shows you what endorsements and coverages that are added to the policy that you may need to have to meet contract requirements and to help protect your company. And let me back up just a moment. I've color-coded the checklists so that the worst things you want to avoid are in red font, so that they stick out to you, make it easy to look at. Some of the most beneficial items are noted in green. So you really, if you don't have the things in green, you really want to see about endorsing your policy to get those if you can, because it's going to give you the protection that you need. All right, so let's scroll down here. So this section is all about coverages that add coverage to you and don't take it away necessarily. So over here, you've got the name of the endorsement form. So it'll say coverage. We've got primary and non-contributory. We've got different types of additional insured forms that you may need and more. This column here shows you, once it's completed, it shows you if the box is checked, you have that coverage. So it's easy to tell at a glance if you have the coverage or not. These two columns here show the coverage form number if it's an ISO coverage form, and the edition date of the form, because there are different edition dates. Things change over time. The next column here shows you if you have coverage, which I would call automatic coverage, if a contract or agreement requires it. That box would be checked. And if that box is checked, let's say it's an additional insured form. If that box is checked, that means you don't have to go ask for an endorsement every time you need that coverage. It will automatically apply if the contract requires it. So having automatic coverage endorsements like that on your policy helps save a lot of time and effort, not only for you, but for your insurance carrier, because you're not having to go ask them for a new endorsement each time something's needed. The next column here shows you, it gives you a way to check the box if a contract requires something. And in your certificate of insurance requirements or the contract requirements, If you're required to provide a copy of a specific endorsement, you can check the box here. If your policy does not have the coverage and you need an endorsement that's on this list, you can easily check the box and then send this form to your insurance broker and say, hey, can you get me quotes on how much it would be to add these endorsements? My contract says I need them. I don't really understand everything that's covered by them, but it looks like I need them. So I need to know if we can get it and how much it's going to cost to get it. And this is another reason why you want to review the insurance requirements in your contracts before you sign the contracts. Because if you do that and you find that you need certain coverages or policies and you don't have them now, you can get your insurance agent or broker to get a quote for that. And now you can build the cost for that into your bid so that if you wait until after you sign the contract and then you find out you need coverage and oh no, it's going to cost $5,000-$10,000 to add it and you didn't build it into your bid, now you're having to pay out of pocket for something. So that's one of the most important reasons why you want to look at those insurance requirements before you sign it. This section over here shows comments about the importance of the different endorsements and things like that. So for example, I know that one of the most commonly required additional insured forms is the CG 2010. And there are issues with that form that a lot of people don't know about because that form requires that everybody that you're required to include as an additional insured, your work has to be done for each of those parties in order to trigger their additional insured coverage. So a tip for you there would be to use the CG 2038 form. So if you have this form on your policy or the CG 2037, which is farther down, check with your broker to see if you can get these forms that are listed here, because they only require that the contract that you have with the GC or the contract that you have for the owner that requires additional insured coverage. It only requires that contract that requires you to name other parties as additional insureds. You don't have to be doing work for all those other additional insureds, just the GC or the owner. And that triggers the coverage. So that helps you avoid an uninsured claim there and breach of contract. So let's scroll down. The next section at the bottom of each of the policy tabs will be a list of exclusions that you should watch out for. And the ones in red are the ones that are really problematic that can take away the coverage that you need. Now, a lot of these have to do with pollution coverage. And if that's the case, if you have any pollution exposures on your job sites or anything you're doing that might have or cause a pollution event, I would suggest you look into getting a contractor's pollution policy and don't rely on the general liability policy to cover that, because general liability policies are not designed to cover pollution risks. So, all right. Yeah, and we've got a comment from Bob that says 2010 may include a statement as required by written contract or agreement. Yes. So you can turn these forms, the CG 2010 and CG 2037, they're written with a box at the top, a fill in the box part, that it's designed to put a specific party's name as the additional insured, but you can turn these into automatic coverage if required by contract just by putting that wording in the fill in the box blank. So thank you, Bob, for that tip. All right, so you can see there's a lot of endorsements to watch out for. We'll take a quick look at the auto policy here. How are we doing on time? We got a little bit more. All right, so on this one, the auto policy is written a little bit differently. It still has your limits. It might have a deductible or a self-insured retention, but it has these things called symbols. Symbol 1, symbol 2, what do all these symbols mean? The symbols mean that's how the coverage applies. So symbol 1 is the most protective because it gives you liability coverage for any auto, the use of any auto. It doesn't matter if it's an owned auto, one that you borrow, one that you hire, rental car, doesn't matter. That's all included under symbol one. So symbol one's the most protective. There are other symbols as well, like 2, 8, and 9 for owned autos, hired autos, and non-owned autos. Some policies have that instead. And that's like second best. But symbols 2 plus 8 plus 9 do not exactly equal symbol 1. So symbol 1's the best. So going down, this is the middle part of the form. These are some of the endorsements that you might need for contracts. Again, the ones in green are the ones that are some of the most important here, especially like the MCS 90 and the pollution liability endorsement here. Now, this one can give you some pollution coverage during transportation. So it is good to have that one. Also, waiver of subrogation, or what they call waiver of transfer of rights of recovery. You want to make sure to get that. In fact, the three most commonly required endorsements in construction contracts for policies are number one, additional insured coverage, so make sure you have that. Number two is primary and non-contributory, and that means that, let's say you're an additional insured on your subcontractor's policy on a primary and non-contributory basis. That means their insurance covers you first on a primary basis, and yours is non-contributory, meaning your policy does not have to pay anything. You're only looking to theirs to pay. Now, it doesn't mean you can't use your own, but why not have them pay for it if you can? So, and then the last of the three for the most commonly required is waiver of subrogation, also known as transfer of rights of recovery. And that's where subrogation is when an insurance carrier goes after another party to try to recoup money that they paid for a claim, because at least in fault or in part due to what that third party did. So when you have a waiver of subrogation, that stops your insurance carrier from going after that other party to try to recoup the money that the insurance carrier paid. And it's a very common requirement in contracts. All right. So workers' comp coverage. This one's laid out a little bit differently at the top. Workers' comp limits are statutory, meaning it depends on the injury or the disease and the state for how much is paid out for different injuries, like a broken arm or broken leg or whatever. The workers' comp 3A states on your policy deck page, which is like usually one of the first pages of a policy that's got your policy number, effective dates, limits, that kind of thing. This is where you would find what's under the 3A states. The 3A states list the states that you're currently doing work in. And the 3C states are states that you anticipate that you might be doing work in the future. Then you've got the employer's liability limits. These are usually all the same limit, like 100,000 or 500,000 or $1 million. And then the next section down here is the different endorsements that could come into play. And sometimes you might get a contract requiring additional insured coverage for all insurance policies or all insurance that's required under a contract. But then they also ask you to provide workers' comp. Workers' comp coverage, additional insured coverage, and primary and non-contributory. It doesn't apply to it. So I'm including it here just as a reminder and to let you know that there is no such thing under the workers' comp policy. So there's a lot of different types of endorsements that could come into play for workers' comp for things, especially around in, over, or next to navigable water. So a lot of that may come into play. And then the umbrella coverage, this will show you, so an umbrella or excess liability policy provides extra limits above your underlying primary policies, like your general liability policy, your auto liability, or the employer's liability limits on the workers' comp. So it gives you extra limits, but the coverage doesn't always apply in exactly the same way as it does on those underlying policies. And so usually you see a request on the insurance requirements of your contracts, asking for what's called follow form coverage. Watch out for that and strike it where you can, because 99.99% of excess policies are not follow form. A true follow form policy is probably only going to have 3 or 4 pages to it. And it's not going to have any other endorsements or exclusions tacked onto it. Follow form means that this excess policy applies exactly the same way as all the underlying policies do. And that's extremely rare. And people that have those policies, they pay a lot more money for them. So they're extremely rare. I kind of liken it to like seeing a unicorn. That's about how rare they are. I've heard about them. I've never seen one in real life. And then down below, you've got some of the coverages that can be required in contracts, such as additional insured, contractual liability, and all of that. So it goes into a list. And then there's a long list of exclusions that could apply to umbrella and excess liability policies. Oh, and what's the difference between umbrella and excess liability coverage, you say? Well, umbrella policies cover over the underlying policies, but they might also give some sublimits or some other coverages that you don't find in the underlying policies. And that's why they call it an umbrella. An excess liability policy just gives higher limits above what's in the underlying policies, but it doesn't give extra types of coverage that aren't in those underlying policies. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. But either an umbrella or excess liability policy could be used to help meet total required limits in contracts. And I'll pause for a minute and just see if there's any questions. Doesn't look like it. All right. So this last page, this is where you're going to find some strategies that you can start using today to help push back on things that are really onerous that you shouldn't be agreeing to, because the upstream party, like the GC or the owner, they're going to be trying to shift down to you as much risk as they can often. And oftentimes it's unreasonable and also unfair to you. So just for example, I won't go through all of these, but if you have contract requirements that are requiring you to provide minimum limits of this or full policy limits, I would suggest striking that minimum or full policy limits, because this is the upstream party's attempt to try to get access to your higher umbrella and excess tower of limits, and for their use as an additional insured. They want access to your higher limits so they can use them. Well, most clients I know purchase those higher limits to protect their own company. They don't mind sharing some of the lower limits, but when it comes to your full tower of limits, it's not a good idea to expose all that to use by another party. So I'd suggest striking that. Anyway, I won't go through the whole list of strategies because I don't want to give everything away. I'll go ahead and stop sharing there, and then we'll check and see if there are any other questions. So feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, or type it in the chat, whatever you'd like. And I know, oh, okay, here's a question. Biggest issue I've seen is the contractor thinking their excess is going over all primary general liability, so auto isn't covered. Hired and non-owned autos may be on the general liability policy, however, the excess may not pick it up and other limitations. That's a great point, Mike. One of the things you want to make sure to check is that the underlying policies are correct on your umbrella or excess liability policy. If it's only covering your general liability, but you have an auto liability policy or employer's liability or whatever, that you want higher limits on that as well, make sure to get that corrected on your policy, because chances are your contracts may need higher limits for auto or may need higher limits for employer's liability, whatever. And Oftentimes, as an insurance broker, when I'm checking policies for umbrella policies, I commonly see mistakes made in the underlying policy schedule that I have to request be fixed. So that is very common. And one thing to look at, make sure that it shows correctly. Because if it doesn't, you need to get it fixed so you can have the coverage that you think you have and yet that you should have and may need. So great question. So today is the start of release of the new Ultimate Subcontractor Insurance Requirement Checklist tool that I just created. It's been 28 years in the making in my brain. And I put it together based on, the decades of experience I've had looking at construction contracts. So I know what's usual and customary, what you may need in the way of contract requirements or insurance requirements, even if a particular construction contract doesn't require X. I can guarantee you some of the other ones will. So I set it up so that it answers the question when it's completed, what coverage do you have? What coverage might you need? And it gives you an easy way to request endorsements. Just check the box if you see you've got this coverage or you don't have that coverage and your contract needs it. Check the box, send it to your insurance agent or broker, and get a quote to see about getting the coverage added. Oftentimes, you can get endorsements added for no more money. So it's good to check that. Anyway, there is a link that we'll be sharing today. So if you want to get just the checklist form without it being filled out, it's only $99. You can start using those strategies and tips on how to reduce your contractual risk. You can get an idea of what your contracts might require. But I am also going to be offering to update the checklist based on your policies for you, because I know a lot of y'all are not insurance experts and you might not have, your insurance agent or broker might not update the checklist for you. So we are offering it at a limited starting price of $1,999. It does take me many hours of my work to put this together for you. And all I need for that is we'll book a call and I'll talk with you about what policies you want included. You send me the policies. I'll put this together. Usually, when it's your turn in the queue for me to review your policies, it takes me maybe 2 or 3 weeks and then you get it back. Now, one thing about putting together the checklist, the best time to do this and the best bang for your buck is as soon as the policies renew and you get your hands on the policies, that's the best time to put this together, because once it's created, you can use that guidance for the rest of the policy term, barring any changes to your coverage. So that's the best time to do it. So we'll stop there and see if there's any questions, comments. But if you do want to book a call with me, you can send me a direct message on LinkedIn. Oh, also my email, that might be helpful. My email is N like Noelle McCall, and that's MCCALL at peoplesfirstinsurance.com. And first is spelled out for the word FARST.com. So that's N McCall at peoplesfirstinsurance.com. You can also contact me by going to my website at Contract Risk Academy. So you can check there as well. And if you need any other help with contract review tools to help make the process faster or easier for you, if you want to get some training on how to do contract review of insurance and risk-related provisions, if you want me to look at your contracts for you, for your insurance requirements, you want to hire me as a consultant, I can do that too. So check out the offerings on the website. You can also follow me for tips, and Rocio as well, on LinkedIn. We regularly have tips out there. We'll be including the link that you can click on to purchase the checklist form or to book a call with me so we can get that process started. And the first 5 folks that sign up for a completed checklist, I will give you a free hour of my time for consulting. We can talk about anything you want. Maybe you've got some pain processes or some things in the process that aren't working for you. You want some tips. You want me to look at specific, like a blurb of insurance language, and you wonder if it's usual and customary or not, or just over the top. Whatever you want, you get a free hour. So I guess I'll stop there. We've got 1 minute to go. Looks like we timed it pretty good. Yay. But yeah, if we can help you with anything, either Rocio or I, please let us know. We are here to help.
All right, thank you guys. Actually, I inputted Noelle's email in the chat, and I also dropped in the link for her contract insurance requirement checklist. So there's going to
Ah,
be an email sent out to everyone that signed up on this web for this presentation, and they will get a copy of the link along with her contact information. And this video will be made public probably by Monday or this weekend.
awesome. Thank you, Rocio. That's so helpful.
Yeah, but I want to thank you guys. Thank you so much, Mike, Jacqueline,
Yes.
Michael, and Bob for joining us. Really appreciate you for sitting down and listening to all of this. I know that all of this sounds very dry and boring, and it is. And that's why it's very thankful to have insurance experts such as Noelle that enjoy this and do this for a living. I also love this too. But
Yeah.
I understand, how it's very critical and it's very complicated because insurance is made for the eyes and the ears of an attorney, for an attorney to interpret and to fight for you. So it's very important
Yeah.
that you know what you're signing before you sign that contract.
Yeah. And my heart is with you, subcontractors, because I know y'all, you work so hard and we need to make things easier for you. So this is my, if you will, my love letter to the subcontractors out there to try to make things easier, to help you review the insurance requirements, protect your company, protect your profits, and help you grow. Because you all are the backbone of this country and you build it. So we appreciate you.
Thank you so much, guys, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
And this.